Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Kritika Samsi. I'm a senior researcher at King's College London. I want to start with just saying I talk quite fast, so please just put your hand up because I'm receptive to feedback. I can slow down. So the background to our research study, which is going to look at whether there's an optimal time for people to move to a care home. We were focusing specifically on people living with dementia, and we were funded by the National Institute of Health and Care Research, the School for Social Care Research. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So the background to the research was that we were addressing a major uncertainty. It's very difficult for people to know when they should start considering a care home move, when might be an optimal time to move, who should people turn to for advice. Carers we were finding routinely in the literature that carers found that it's very difficult to know who to turn to for advice, when they should turn to someone for advice, should this be considered at the point of diagnosis, and when exactly to kickstart the process of thinking about a care home move if that was something they wished to consider. Most care home moves tended to happen during a crisis when a carer often tended to have what was described as burnout and was unable to care. So it was the literature kind of highlighted that it was always this perfect storm of everything happening at the same time. And we wanted to unpick this a little bit because we realized that is the reality for a lot of people, especially when the issues of funding come in. So we just wanted to unpick this a little bit to see what might be going on when people are considering a move and try to kind of get to whether or not there was an optimal time for people to consider moving into a care home. And we were situating our study very much within this context of the negativity and the stigma around moving to a care home. I've worked in social care research for many, many years, specifically with supporting the social care workforce. So we know that there is a lot of stigma around care homes. This may have been amplified, especially during COVID, but even pre-COVID, this study was conducted pre-COVID, there always is stigma around what happens in care homes, whether or not it's a place that is appropriate for people living with dementia, and when might be an appropriate time for them to move in. So we were really just wishing to kind of unpick this a little bit more. Can I have the next slide, please? So the aims of the research was threefold. It was a 3-year, 3-part study, but obviously I only have 20 minutes, so I'll be much briefer about the way I present. So we wanted to specifically kind of look at what might be factors that drive a care home move, and what might be the drivers of this decision. Who is making it? Who is suggesting it? How does it kind of evolve? How does it happen? And what can be done to support the people who are involved in this decision as it plays out? And then we wanted to almost distill it into what, if any, is an optimal time to move into a care home. And I'll tell you now, we didn't find it as a specific point in a disease trajectory. It was really just to see how people consider what is the optimal time or the right time to move into a care home. Can I have the next slide, please? So what we did is what is called in research a qualitative research study, which is essentially to ask different groups of people what their experiences were like, what their views, what their opinions are, and try to get a sense of what are overlapping consistencies or themes across the different participant groups. So we spoke to 21 family carers and 5 people living with dementia who had recently moved into a care home. So we specifically wanted it to be within the last 6 months, but didn't want it to be as soon as they had moved in because we realized there's a lot of emotionality that may have gone into it. But we thought that beyond 6 months, people might start to forget. So we kind of tailored it towards that 5-month, 6-month period, and to speak to people who had what we thought was recent. Who had recently moved into a care home. We also spoke to 20 care home managers and to 20 social workers. And in England, this is people who work in a local authority, who work with people living with dementia, and who support people living with dementia, making care plans, thinking about their future, and who are in a position to have these early discussions with people who live in the community. Like I said, we did face-to-face one-off interviews. This was pre-COVID, and we had the luxury of making all these appointments at people's homes and going to people's offices and in care homes where appropriate. And just to say, we obtained the ethical approvals and permissions before proceeding. So we made sure that we were kind of covering all of the ethical things before we as researchers embarked on a potentially sensitive topic. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So, like I said, we almost tried to distill it down into, is there an optimal or right time? And we hoped we'd have like a magic answer, and we didn't. But I'd like to say that what I present next about the findings kind of unpacks this a little bit, just to kind of harness what was important about this transition at the time people were considering a care home move. Can I have the next slide, please? So as you can imagine, this was a very difficult decision for everyone to weigh up. It was emotional. Everyone that we spoke to said it was emotional. All the carers and the people living with dementia that we spoke to said it was highly emotional. What we were struck by was that the emotionality lingered long after the decision had been made. We entered the research topic thinking it was a point of time when people would decide to move into a care home, and maybe there'd be a little bit of relief after the decision had been made, but we felt that a lot of the participants were telling us that the emotionality of it lingered long after. We recognize that people who come forward for research may be a little bit different or atypical, but despite that, it was very clear that people thought about their decision, lingered on it, questioned whether they'd done this long after. What was also striking was that the social workers and the care home managers that we spoke to also lingered on their decision. So again, it could be the people we were speaking to, but it did seem that they ruminated on whether they had advised the right, had given the right advice, had been involved at the right stages, and that the emotionality of it was something that most participants carried with them long after the move had taken place. Risk and safety, as you can imagine, were primary considerations, especially for social workers and people who were involved in advising about when a care home move should be undertaken. And related to this was about the ability of a carer to continue caring. So whether or not if someone who was looking after a relative living with dementia in their own home was able to continue caring, so that they were both being considered when a care home move was being advised for a person living with dementia. And like I said, a lot of these things pointed to a crisis move taking place, so people were worried about carer burnout taking place, so advising about preventing a crisis move by advising people to consider a care home move at a certain stage of their lives. What was striking was social isolation at home was a big trigger for many people, and that social isolation typically wasn't coming up in conversations, but social workers were very aware that to prevent social isolation, care homes were really lovely places for someone to move into. They were social environments, they were stimulating, and that the negative attitude of care homes in society was actually defeating people from considering the social environment of a care home as being quite good for people who might have cognitive impairment. Can I have the next slide, please? The involvement of parties, it's legal to ensure that a person living with dementia is involved in the decision, but we found a striking connection between the involvement of people living with dementia resulting in better settling into the care homes. And this was across all participant groups. So not just family carers who felt this way, even care home managers said that any time the person with dementia was involved in their decision, they felt that they were more in control of their decision, felt more autonomous, and the settling in process was that much more straightforward. Sometimes, of course, it was necessary to advise or act in the best interest of the person with dementia, even if it overrode their decisions sometimes or their wishes. A big theme was how unsupported carers felt. This has come up in the literature, but we felt this in our interviews as well. And almost all of them talked about the role care home managers provided in giving them information, giving them emotional support. And again, I feel like this is a workforce that doesn't always come up in a lot of our work. Care home managers are not seen as part of the social care workforce in a very standardized way, but the amount of support they were giving care home residents, the carers of care home residents, and the amount of support that care home carers and the amount of support carers felt from care home managers and felt like they could talk to them if they had to kind of consider a care home move. And carers felt the weight of responsibility of the decision, often second-guessing themselves. So I really like this quote, who is a person talking about her mum, and she said, "Mum was not ready 6 months ago to go into a care home. She used to still go out to the shop and get a paper and do all that. Okay, used to leave her credit card all over the place, but she moved when it was finally the right time for her, I think. Although maybe if we had done it a few months earlier, she may have adjusted better. It's so hard to know." I really like this quote because I think even carers, I think risk and safety is seen as a professional term, whereas carers are weighing it up all the time as well. Some might think leaving credit cards around is dangerous, whereas this carer was very willing to take this risk for her mother, but she still guesses herself. She still thinks, I still don't know if I've done the right thing. And lots of people felt if they moved in early and settled well, maybe we should have kept them at home for longer. It was never a straightforward decision that people felt like it worked out and then they could sit back and be relieved about it. Can I have the next slide, please? So we wanted to kind of weigh up timing and whether moving in early in an earlier stage of dementia was seen as beneficial to moving in during the later stages. Can I have the next slide? And this social worker felt very strongly about moving in too early, you are de-skilling someone. You are in a 24-hour living environment where they get you up at a certain time, they make tea for you, they make lunch for you. You don't really have that independence. And just feeling that some people had very strong views about not knowing exactly what happened in certain care homes, not knowing whether or not it was a de-skilling environment, just having a blanket opinion about all care homes, and not therefore able to maybe give the right kind of advice for that particular context or family member. But many felt that limited awareness may be beneficial in minimizing distress, but not really knowing exactly whether that would play out for everyone in the same way. Can I have the next slide, please? And moving in early. So this care home manager says, I think people being able to participate in that decision of moving is really, really important. You do feel you have some control. You do see them happier for it. It gives them the opportunity to adapt into such an environment. So this care home manager was very much in support of trying to advise people about consider an early care home move if you can afford it, because there are benefits to getting someone involved in the decision, not just in the move, but in the decision to move as well, which was so crucial for settling in as they saw it. Can I have the next slide, please? Almost all of the moves happened at a crisis point. People are weighing up finances and whether or not they can afford a care home move, so maybe they put it off for later, but moves were very rarely straightforward. There was always a hospital visit, moving to one care home, it may not work out, someone moving to another care home. It never felt like it was a straightforward trajectory or a straightforward transition, but what we found was that there were these stepping stones that some of them said had been really, really beneficial. One was the value of waiting lists. We had a number of carers who said they had put the names of their relative on a waiting list and found it a very beneficial way of having these early discussions. Having these discussions within the family, when a care home manager said that they would ring up people on their waiting list, and it gave them the chance to consider it every year. Do we feel ready yet? Maybe not. We can think of it another time. And just having these discussions, so when a care home move finally happened, it wasn't as stressful and traumatic. It was something that had been discussed for a long time in the family, maybe even in some cases since they had been diagnosed. Respite stays. On the back of this, we've done a really lovely little study on looking at respite in a care home and being a really good way of having these stepping stones as well. So being familiar with the care home environment, visiting the day center that is in the care home, having these respite stays as being a really beneficial way of getting to know the environment and thinking, this is going to be something that my relative living with dementia will enjoy. This is going to be something I will enjoy when I move in as well. So this person living with dementia says, I feel that we could have maybe managed at home for another few months, but the place I'm in now was available, so it was sensible to move at the time. Yes, it was okay, it all worked out. So just a general sense of acceptance. Whether or not they've embraced it, it's hard to know, but a general sense of acceptance of the time came up, it was right, we'd been talking about it for a long time, and the settling in process being a little bit easier as a result of it. Can I have the next slide, please, which I think is the last one? Yeah, so, it was just to kind of wrap up and say there was no consensus on optimal time. It was very individual, contextual, very family-specific, depending on where families were. Relatives felt the responsibility for making this decision on behalf of the person living with dementia, especially if their dementia had advanced, and they held this emotionality long after the transition had taken place. The support the care home managers provided has almost been ignored in the literature so far, and it was something that we found was really important in our research. The value of earlier discussions and care planning were useful. It also took away a lot of the stigma that local care homes might have, and it was a useful way of the stepping stones were a useful way for people to kind of consider the moves within their families for long before it actually took place. It also is just important to say that the process of how the move took place, how much in a crisis it took place, how planned it was, seemed to have an effect on the settling in process, which is probably a really important thing to also mention. Yeah, and can I have the last slide, please? So I just want to end with saying thank you, because all our participants were talking about really sensitive and emotional topics, which we obviously could not have done this research without them giving us their views. Thank you.